A wealthy man came home early and saw his maid eating lunch outside in the pouring rain. He wondered why she wouldn't come inside to eat in the warm kitchen. The truth about why she sat in the rain will absolutely destroy you emotionally. The afternoon rain fell steadily as Richard Morrison pulled his Mercedes into the circular driveway of his mansion, home 3 hours earlier than expected after his business lunch was cancelled. Through the rain-streaked windshield, he noticed something unusual. A figure sitting on the stone bench in his garden, hunched over what appeared to be a small lunch container, getting soaked in the downpour. As Richard grabbed his briefcase and ran toward his front door, he realized with shock that the person sitting in the rain was Maria Santos, his housekeeper of 6 months, eating her lunch outside despite the weather and the fact that his entire warm, dry house stood empty behind her. Richard stood inside his foyer, water dripping from his expensive suit, staring through the window at Maria, who continued eating methodically in the rain as if this was completely normal. His mind raced with confusion and growing concern. Why would anyone choose to eat outside in the rain when they had access to a warm kitchen? Was this some kind of protest? Had someone told her she couldn't eat inside? Richard prided himself on treating his staff well, paying fair wages and never imposing unreasonable rules. But watching Maria sit in the rain made him question everything about his household management. Unable to ignore what he was seeing, Richard grabbed an umbrella and walked back outside, approaching Maria, who looked up with surprise and immediate fear when she saw him. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry. I thought you'd be gone until evening. I'll finish quickly and get back to work." Her hands trembled as she started to stand, her simple meal of rice and beans barely touched, her thin jacket soaked through, her dark hair plastered to her face. Richard held up his hand gently. "Maria, please don't apologize. I'm not upset that you're eating lunch. I'm confused why you're eating in the rain. Why aren't you inside? The kitchen is warm. You're getting soaked out here." Maria's eyes filled with tears, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm not allowed to eat inside, sir. My contract says I can only use the kitchen for preparing your meals, not for my own use. I eat outside so I don't break the rules." Richard felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "What contract? I never put that in any contract. Who told you that?" Maria pulled out a worn piece of paper from her jacket pocket, protected in a plastic bag, and handed it to Richard. The document was a standard employment contract, but someone had added a handwritten clause at the bottom stating that household staff were not permitted to consume food in the main house and must take their meals outside or in their personal quarters. Richard stared at the addition with growing fury, recognizing immediately the handwriting of his mother, Catherine Morrison, who'd helped him hire staff after his divorce, left him managing the household alone. His mother was old-fashioned, believing in strict separation between employers and help, maintaining boundaries that Richard found outdated and cruel. He'd never actually read the contracts his mother prepared, trusting her to handle the administrative details while he focused on his business. That trust had resulted in Maria eating lunch in the rain for 6 months, following rules Richard never intended and wouldn't have approved if he'd known. "Come inside right now," Richard said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Maria, you're not in trouble, but I need you to come inside where it's warm and dry. We need to talk." Maria followed him hesitantly into the kitchen, leaving puddles on the marble floor, her entire body shivering from cold and fear of consequences she assumed were coming. Richard grabbed towels, insisting she dry off while he made her hot tea, his mind reeling from the realization that his employee had been suffering unnecessary hardship for months because of rules he'd been unaware existed. As Maria warmed up, Richard pulled out her employment contract and physically crossed out the offensive clause. "This rule doesn't exist anymore. You eat inside from now on. Use the kitchen however you need. Make yourself lunch here. Eat at the kitchen table. You're part of this household, and I'm ashamed that you've been treated otherwise." Maria stared at him with disbelief. "But your mother said that help shouldn't get comfortable in the employer's space, that it creates problems with boundaries and entitlement." Richard's voice was firm. "My mother is wrong. You spend 8 hours a day making my house livable. You cook my meals and clean my messes. The absolute least I can do is provide you a warm, dry place to eat your lunch. Anyone who says otherwise doesn't deserve to have employees. Over the following days, Richard discovered other problematic clauses his mother had inserted. Maria couldn't use the main bathroom and had to use a facility in the basement. Couldn't sit on the furniture even during breaks. Couldn't accept Christmas bonuses without signing documents promising to work extra hours. Each discovery made Richard more horrified at the conditions Maria had endured silently. Assuming they were normal, because the person who hired her had authority, and she desperately needed the job to support her family back in Honduras. Richard called his mother, their conversation difficult but necessary. "Mother, I've seen the contract you wrote for Maria. The rules about where she can eat, use the bathroom, sit down. They're degrading and inhumane." Maria responded calmly that these were traditional standards for household staff, that Richard was being overly sensitive, that help needed clear boundaries or they'd take advantage. Richard's response was final. "I'm an adult who makes my own decisions about my household. Your help is no longer needed with staffing. And if you can't treat people with basic dignity, you're not welcome here." The conversation damaged their relationship, but freed Richard to manage his home according to his own values. He rewrote all employment contracts, added paid sick days and vacation time, increased wages, and most importantly, started treating Maria like a valued member of his household rather than invisible help. He learned about her children, asked about her day, invited her to eat lunch with him when they were both home, treating her like the human being with dreams and struggles that she was. Maria's transformation was visible. She smiled more, offered suggestions for household improvements, and eventually felt comfortable enough to share that she'd been studying English online, hoping to pass the citizenship test. Richard immediately hired a tutor, paid for her test preparation, and became her study partner, celebrating when she passed and became a citizen. He attended her naturalization ceremony like family, genuinely proud of her accomplishment. Years later, when Maria's children came to America through legal immigration, Richard helped them find jobs and housing, supporting their family's dream the way employers should, but rarely do. And whenever Richard heard business associates complaining about lazy employees or the difficulty of finding good help, he'd share the story of finding Maria eating in the rain, how his assumptions about trust had led to cruelty he never intended, and how taking time to actually see and value people transformed both their lives. His final point was always the same. If someone is sitting in the rain rather than telling you something's wrong, you've created an environment where they don't feel safe speaking up, and that's your failure, not theirs.